"Do you know what it feels like," she whispered, her voice calm but heavy, "to build a life so carefully, brick by brick, only to have someone look at you like you don't belong in the seat you earned? Not just a seat on this plane, but every seat you ever fought for." Her eyes didn't blink as she looked at the rows ahead. "I've walked into rooms where no one expected me to be the one in charge. I've sat at tables where silence weighed more than words, because people couldn't believe that I was the CEO they were waiting for. And here I am again, in a moment so small, yet so loud, a seat on a plane. But isn't it always more than that?" Her words carried in the quiet hum of the boarding cabin. Passengers fumbled with their luggage, headphones and tickets, but the weight of her tone seemed to slice through the ordinary chatter. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, at least not at first, but to the air, to the very silence that often meets her in places where she is underestimated. The woman was Amara Johnson, 39 years old, a woman who had fought through endless late nights and broken ceilings to become the CEO of a rising global tech company. Known for her calm fire and sharp instincts, she carried herself with elegance and quiet authority. But tonight, on this flight, she was simply a tired traveler on her way home after negotiating a deal that could change lives for thousands of employees. All she wanted was her seat, her window, her few hours of peace in the sky. But the seat wasn't empty. A man sat there, a middle-aged white passenger, settled comfortably as though it had been his all along. His coat draped across his lap, his headphones already in, and the faint smirk on his lips signaling something unspoken. He wasn't moving. Amara paused. For a moment she thought she might be mistaken. Maybe she had glanced at the wrong row. She checked her boarding pass again. 14A. Seat. Yes, this was it. She turned her gaze back at the man. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice polite but clear. "I believe you're in my seat." The man didn't remove his headphones, only shifted his eyes toward her without moving his head. His smirk deepened as if he found humor in her request. Finally, he tugged one side of the headphone down. "This one's taken," he said casually. Amara blinked, holding her boarding pass out slightly, almost instinctively, though she knew she didn't have to prove anything. "It's actually assigned to me, 14A. You might be in 14B?" The man let out a short laugh, not the kind born of joy but of dismissal. "Listen, sweetheart, I've already settled in. Why don't you just take that aisle seat? You'll thank me later. It's more comfortable anyway." A flicker of heat ran through Amara's chest. She could feel the eyes of nearby passengers shifting toward her, curious but silent. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself of all the times she had been told to choose her battles. But this wasn't just about comfort. It was about respect. "I'm not asking for favors," Amara replied evenly. "This seat is mine. That's where I'm supposed to sit." The man leaned back, folding his arms. "Look around," he muttered. "Plenty of seats on this flight. Don't make a scene over one little number." That word. Scene. As if her dignity was a performance, her rightful claim a drama. Her fingers tightened around her boarding pass. She remembered late nights in boardrooms where she had to defend decisions men never questioned. She remembered moments where her ideas were stolen, her silence mistaken for weakness. And now this, another man assuming she would yield, because yielding is easier than fighting. Before she could answer, a flight attendant approached, her warm smile slightly dimmed by the tension in the air. "Is everything okay here?" she asked. Amara turned, relieved for a moment, but the man was quick to speak first. "Yeah, we're fine," he said smoothly. "She's just confused about her seat. I told her she can have the aisle." Confused. Amara almost laughed, but not from humor. She held up her ticket, her voice steady. "I'm not confused. My boarding pass says 14A. He's in it." The attendant glanced at the pass, then at the man. Her smile faltered just slightly, professionalism anchoring her. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass, please?" The man sighed, exaggerated, fishing through his jacket pocket with the weariness of someone inconvenienced. He handed it over. She checked it. 14B. "Sir," the attendant said, her voice firm but still courteous, "you're actually in 14B, the aisle. This seat belongs to her." The man gave a half shrug. "Like I said, I'm already settled. Can't she just take the aisle? Why make it a big deal? The attendant's eyes flickered, unsure for a second, caught between de-escalating and enforcing. The silence stretched. A few passengers were openly watching now, their earbuds dangling, their books forgotten. Amara could feel the air thicken, her heartbeat steady, but hard. She knew this moment wasn't about winning an argument. It was about something larger. Her voice dropped, low but unshakable. All my life, she said, I've had to prove I belong, to prove I've earned my place. Tonight is no different. This is my seat, and I won't step aside just because someone else feels entitled to it. Something in her tone made the cabin still. Even the hum of conversation seemed to quiet. She wasn't angry, she wasn't loud. She was simply resolute, and that carried more power than rage could have. The attendant hesitated, then nodded slowly. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to your assigned seat. The man shook his head. This is ridiculous. Do you really want to delay everyone because she can't just let it go? Because I won't let it go, Amara replied firmly. Not anymore. The attendant pressed her lips together, preparing to escalate. Somewhere in the back, another attendant was alerted. The tension was mounting, not just between two passengers, but in the atmosphere of the entire flight. People leaned forward, whispers ran through the cabin, and though no one yet realized it, this simple standoff would soon ground the entire plane. Amara stood there, her hand resting lightly on the back of the seat in front of her, eyes never leaving the man who refused to move. A silent storm passed between them, unseen, but palpable. And in that storm, a truth became clear. Sometimes the smallest acts of standing your ground can shake the ground beneath everyone else. And at that moment, before the next words were spoken, before decisions were made, before the night would unravel into something unforgettable, there was silence, and in that silence she whispered to herself words no one else could hear. I will not shrink for anyone. The silence stretched too long, the kind of silence that swells before something breaks. Amara stood rooted to the narrow aisle, her eyes still locked on the man who refused to budge. The flight attendant shifted uneasily, glancing toward the cockpit, as if weighing her options. The passengers whispered, their murmurs floating like small sparks ready to catch fire. Finally, the man leaned forward, pulling his bag tighter under the seat in front of him. His voice was louder now, sharp. I told you, this isn't worth all the fuss. What difference does it make where you sit? Amara's voice cut through the air, steady and low, but with a gravity that stilled the whispers around her. It makes all the difference, because it's mine, because I won't be dismissed. Not here, not now. The flight attendant's radio crackled softly. A second attendant approached, her expression more serious. She bent close to her colleague, whispering something quickly before straightening up. The man rolled his eyes, throwing his head back against the headrest. Unbelievable, he muttered. You'd think she was fighting for her life, not a seat. Amara's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, not of humor but of resilience. You have no idea how many times a seat like this meant more than you'll ever understand. The second attendant spoke now, her tone firmer, professional but leaving no space for negotiation. Sir, you are required to sit in your assigned seat. If you cannot comply, we'll have to involve the captain. That may result in your removal from the flight. The man sat up, his face tightening. He looked at the attendants, then at Amara, then at the people watching with quiet judgment. His pride battled visibly with his reason. You're really going to ground a whole plane over this? He asked incredulously. The second attendant didn't flinch. Sir, please move to your assigned seat. Amara remained silent now, not because she had nothing left to say, but because she understood the weight of silence. She didn't need to argue anymore. The truth was already louder than anything he could throw at her, but he didn't move. He sat stubbornly, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the armrests as though the seat itself was a throne. Minutes ticked by. The murmurs among passengers grew louder. Some looked irritated, some curious, others quietly supportive of Amara, though no one spoke aloud. Finally, the first attendant lifted her radio, her voice controlled but urgent. Captain, we may need assistance at row 14. The man scoffed. Oh, come on. This is absurd. You're really going to drag me off a flight because she wants to feel important? That was it. The words sliced through Amara, but instead of cutting her down, they sharpened her resolve. She stepped just slightly closer, her voice calm, almost tender, but ringing with power. "I don't need to feel important," she said softly. "I already am. Just like you are. Just like every person on this plane is. But the difference is, I won't let you steal what's mine, simply because you think you can." For a moment, his eyes met hers, and something flickered. Anger, maybe shame, maybe recognition. But before he could answer, the captain himself appeared at the front of the cabin, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding immediate silence. "What seems to be the problem here?" the captain asked, his voice firm but neutral. The second attendant quickly explained. The captain's eyes scanned the boarding passes, then rested on the man. "Sir, you're in the wrong seat. You need to move. Now." The man shook his head in disbelief. "Captain, look, I've been flying for years. This is ridiculous. It's just one seat." The captain's jaw tightened. "It's not about the seat. It's about following the rules and respecting other passengers. You either move to your assigned seat, or we will have to escort you off this aircraft." The words landed heavy in the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, sensing this moment was bigger than they first thought. Amara stood silently, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't celebrating, she wasn't triumphant. She was simply resolute, embodying something more than the conflict in front of her. The man's fists tightened. "You know what? Forget it. I'm not moving." Gasps rippled through the rows. The captain's expression hardened, his voice clipped. "Then this flight isn't going anywhere." The announcement struck like thunder. A murmur of frustration rolled through the cabin, but it was quickly swallowed by the gravity of the captain's words. The flight was now officially grounded until the matter was resolved. The man's face flushed, a cocktail of embarrassment and defiance. He looked around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes on him, eyes that judged, eyes that pierced. The smirk that once lingered on his lips was gone. Amara's voice, soft and clear, broke the silence again. "Do you see now? This isn't just about me. When you refuse to do what's right, everyone pays the price." Her words weren't sharp, but they carried the weight of truth. The passengers felt it. Even those who had been irritated moments ago seemed to quiet in reflection. The man swallowed hard, his pride warring with his shame. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, his shoulders slumped just slightly. The captain crossed his arms. "What's it going to be, sir?" The cabin held its breath. Amara didn't move, didn't blink, didn't release the quiet strength that seemed to hold the air itself in place. And as the tension reached its breaking point, somewhere deep inside that man, something cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to shift the ground beneath him. He whispered, almost too low for anyone to hear, "Fine." The word slipped out like surrender. He stood slowly, every motion heavy, dragging himself into the aisle. The attendants moved quickly, ensuring his things were gathered, his path cleared. He collapsed into 14B, the aisle seat that had been his all along. Amara finally slid into 14A, her rightful place. She exhaled softly, not in relief, but in quiet triumph, the kind that doesn't boast but simply stands tall. The captain lingered a moment, his eyes flickering between them, then nodded before returning to the cockpit. The attendants moved on, restoring the rhythm of boarding. Passengers settled back, though their eyes lingered longer on Amara than on anyone else. The engines hummed, but the cabin still felt altered, charged, as if the air itself had absorbed the weight of what had just occurred. And though Amara stared quietly out the window, she knew this wasn't over. Because sometimes the moments that seem the smallest leave echoes that are anything but small. The flight may have been grounded for a few minutes, but what it grounded in hearts and minds would last far longer. The hum of the engines returned, steady and low, but the air inside the cabin was still thick with the residue of tension. Passengers shifted in their seats, glancing from the corner of their eyes toward Amara and the man beside her. For most, the scene was over, but for Amara it was only beginning. She sat quietly in 14A, her window seat, her hands folded gently in her lap. Outside, the runway lights shimmered against the night sky, lines of gold guiding the aircraft forward. Yet she felt none of the peace she usually did when looking out at the world below. Instead, her heart pounded softly, not from anger, but from something far heavier, the weight of standing tall when it would have been easier to sit small. Beside her, the man sat stiffly in 14B, his body angled away, his jaw set, arms crossed tight against his chest. He didn't look at her. He didn't say a word. His pride was a shield, but Amara knew shields often hide more than they protect. Minutes passed. The plane taxied slowly, then paused again, waiting for clearance after the earlier disruption. The captain's voice echoed over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've had a minor delay, but expect to be on our way shortly." A ripple of murmurs filled the cabin, then quieted. The world seemed to settle again, yet inside Amara's chest there was no stillness. She could feel the stares of passengers lingering, not cruelly, not judgmentally, but with something else. Something she had felt before in boardrooms and conference halls, the weight of being seen. And then, unexpectedly, the silence beside her broke. "You could have just let it go," the man muttered, his voice low, almost as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Amara turned her head slowly, her eyes calm, her expression soft but steady. "And what would I have left if I did?" His eyes flicked toward her for the first time, sharp, but behind the sharpness was something else. Confusion, maybe even curiosity. "It's just a seat," he said again, but his words lacked the force they carried before. Amara tilted her head slightly. "To you, maybe. To me. It's every time someone tried to tell me I didn't belong. Every time I was asked to move aside, to shrink, to disappear quietly so someone else could take up more space. It's not just a seat. It's a statement." The man's lips pressed into a thin line. He stared ahead, as if her words had pinned him in place. The shield of his pride wavered, just slightly. Silence filled the gap again, but this silence was different, less heavy, more contemplative. The plane began to move, engines rumbling as it prepared for takeoff. As the aircraft lifted into the dark sky, Amara leaned back, her body relaxing into the seat she had fought for. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, allowing herself to feel the quiet victory. Not loud, not boastful, but deeply hers. Hours passed in the dimmed cabin. Passengers slept, movies played softly on small screens, the world outside a blanket of stars. Amara stared out the window, her thoughts drifting. She thought of her childhood, of classrooms where teachers overlooked her hand raised high. She thought of her early career, where colleagues spoke over her, doubted her, dismissed her. She thought of the nights she stayed awake, building strategies, leading teams, proving over and over that her worth wasn't up for debate. And now this flight, this tiny, ordinary, extraordinary moment, was another page in that same story. Her gaze shifted subtly toward the man beside her. He wasn't asleep. His posture was tense, his eyes staring at the seat back in front of him as though trapped in a war inside himself. She could see it, how his jaw tightened, how his hands flexed and unflexed, restless. Finally, in the quiet hum of the cabin, his voice returned, quieter than before. "You don't understand," he said, barely above a whisper. Amara looked at him. "Then help me." His eyes flickered toward hers, hesitation heavy in them. For the first time his voice cracked, not from volume but from something deeper. I've never had to fight for a seat," he admitted. "Not once. Never even thought about it. And when you stood there, it made me realize how easily I take things, how easily I expect the world to bend." Amara didn't respond immediately. She let his words settle, let them find their place in the air between them. Then she said softly, "It's not too late to see differently. That's what matters." For a moment, his mask slipped. The arrogance, the smirk, the stubborn pride, they all fell away. What was left was something raw, something human. His shoulders sagged, as if he had been holding a weight he hadn't realized was his. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice trembling with something dangerously close to regret. "I was wrong to take your seat, and I was wrong to make you prove it was yours." Amara's eyes softened. She didn't need an apology to validate her choice, but hearing it mattered. It meant something had shifted, however small, inside him. "You can do better tomorrow," she said gently. "That's all any of us can do." He nodded, almost imperceptibly, his gaze falling to the floor. The rest of the flight passed in quiet reflection. No more words were exchanged, but the silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was something else, a fragile bridge, a beginning of understanding. When the plane finally landed, passengers rose, gathering their belongings. The man stood as well, awkwardly adjusting his bag. He turned to Amara, his face softer than it had been since the beginning. "Thank you," he said quietly, almost reverently. Amara met his eyes, her own calm and steady. "Remember this moment. That's the real thanks." He nodded again, and for once there was no smirk, no shield, just a man changed, however slightly, by a woman who refused to shrink. As Amara stepped off the plane, the cool air of the jet bridge brushing her face, she felt a quiet strength inside her. She hadn't just claimed a seat. She had claimed her place in yet another chapter of a life built on resilience, on courage, on refusing to surrender her dignity. And as she walked into the terminal, she knew something true. The battles we fight in silence often echo the loudest in others. Sometimes, holding onto your seat means giving someone else a chance to finally take theirs in life, and that's how change begins. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Black Saga for more powerful, emotional, and life-changing stories.